BlackSpace Oklahoma. I am ecstatic to be here today representing BlackSpace New York City and BlackSpace Chicago. We are so excited to celebrate you all and welcome today's participants to the BlackSpace community. This is my first time in Oklahoma, and it is such a treat and honor to be here at this historic location. I'm Emma Osori. I'm the co-founder of BlackSpace, and since 2015, we've been building an international community of Black urbanists who elevate each other to professional excellence, and we also work on heritage projects in historically Black neighborhoods. We were thrilled with the establishment of BlackSpace Oklahoma after the Harvard Graduate School of Design's Black in Design Conference in 2017. You all have absolutely quantum leaped BlackSpace as an organization. Not only have you produced a set of events that amplify the stories of Black people, Black spaces, and Black cultures, but BlackSpace Oklahoma was also the first in the collective to establish as a nonprofit entity and pushed us to formalize all of our chapters, actually. They were on us. They were like, okay, when do we get the press kit? When do we get the hashtags? What should our handle be? And we were like, okay, oh my gosh, we need all these things now. So they have absolutely moved our entire organization forward with their ingenuity, insight, and initiative. And they continue with this convening to set the bar for what our chapters can achieve in the future. And we never in our wildest dreams thought that we would have a chapter here in Oklahoma, but learning about the pioneering legacies of Black people and spaces in Oklahoma has been both really difficult and also very important work. And we are to the story of America, and we are so grateful to BlackSpace Oklahoma for doing the work. Thank you. We cannot tell you how proud of you we are to be on this journey of acknowledging, amplifying, and affirming Black spaces. Congratulations on establishing this amazing symposium, this series, to understand the past and push us all into a better future. So again, we are proud of the placemaking through storytelling series of events, ensuring Black people, Black culture, and Black spaces matter and thrive.
I am the president of Chopin Associates, and I'm also the project manager and developers rep for this historic full building development that's going around it. The Northeast Storytelling Project has introduced BlackSpace to our community. The program was funded in part by the Oklahoma Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And we have to give this disclaimer that any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in the program do not necessarily represent those of Oklahoma Humanities nor any age. This project, it was birthed out of collaborative work between myself, Deborah Richards, and BlackSpace Oklahoma. Deborah does a lot of community-based design work, and so we were collaborating with business people in the community who actually wanted to lease space or bring their businesses to this new development. And out of that collaboration, out of that work, came the idea for this lecture series. The funding for the project was brought to our attention by the ladies of the Northeast Oklahoma City Photo Voice Project, which is a previous collaborative work. And the project has had events that have been really just wonderful. We've had events throughout this month. For those of you who have had the opportunity to be on this journey with us, we thank you. For those of you who are just joining us today for the first time, we have had a tremendous time with our community, with our humanities scholars, and just in general, it has been a very rich experience.
Hi, my name is Deborah Richards. I'm a sister, and I have a local firm called Script Architecture. So this project is a lecture series that was exploring community assets, values, identities, ideas within Black neighborhood spaces. And we started first with Dr. Henderson and Anita Arnold, sort of the elders of the community, sharing their stories with us. It was really much. We'd like to thank them. It was wonderful.
And then our second event was March 9th, and we had a panel of humanities experts discussing storytelling methods, how we document stories and how we tell stories. That event gave way to the 2 workshops that we held subsequently. The workshops were facilitated by Dr. Tracy Floriani and Dr. Rachel Jackson. Our 6 panelists were Dr. George Henderson, Dr. Jackson, Dr. Floriani, Dr. Joshua Nelson, and Suzette Chang. And we just want to thank them for just a job well done in really setting the stage for the community engagement component. And then I just want to say a special thanks to our community. The workshops gave us an opportunity to hear our community stories. They came in on the 16th and just gave raw history, told us what it was like to live on the east side of Oklahoma City, how history has shaped the fabric of the community, how it's changed, and the events that made them who they are. And then on the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, we had a very intensive 3-day workshop facilitated by Dr. Dr. Jackson and her team. It was one of the most enriching experiences that I think I've ever been through. And I just want to say kudos to all of those who had an opportunity to participate. Their stories were beautifully written. They made us laugh, they made us cry, but mostly they just made us really proud. And so all of those people, if there's anyone here who had a chance to participate in any of the storytelling workshops, I just want to give you a hand. Could you raise your hand, take a stand? I just want to. You are awesome.
The final event, which is today, we're going to be a lecture by Rick Lowe, where he's going to discuss and describe how community can use their stories to create positive change, specifically for the design of community spaces. We also have Hans Butzer here, the Dean of the College of Architecture, who's going to describe how his public spaces and memorial projects in Oklahoma City have been inspired by history and stories as well. So through these projects, or through these events, and this project, Northeast Oklahoma City Storytelling Project, we are trying to create a foundation for understanding how the histories and stories of the community can be used to create stronger community relationships and spaces while also imagining future possibilities.
So I just want to take a moment, because we won't have the opportunity to do it again, to just do a little administrative housekeeping and say thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you again to the Humanities, Oklahoma Humanities. Thank you again to the National Endowment for the Humanities, to the Photo Voice ladies who have volunteered. Not only did they identify the funding source, but they have come in and volunteered and helped us set up. I want to thank the RCPL, which is the Regional City Planning Program, Professors Dr. John Harris and Dr. Ajin Lee, and their student volunteers who have been at every event. They have come in and trained and helped us build capacity in the community in terms of helping to facilitate the oral history workshops as well as the digital history workshops. Dr. Jackson's team, Hannah, Jordan, Steve, Dr. Penley, and Austin, they came out and helped with the videography. Melissa's team, the auditorium, which is front of house productions, all of our videographers, every person who did anything. If you sent someone to us, if you hung up a poster, if you delivered something to a church, if you set up an interview for us with the media, all of the media outlets, all of our moderators. I see Ayana Najuma is here, Kim Francisco, Tony Francisco, and then again, all of our volunteers. Ron Bradshaw, this beautiful building, I don't know if he's here today, but thank you very much. And this has just really been a wonderful experience. And of course, the College of Architecture, OU's College of Architecture, and the BlackSpace team. You are all awesome. So right now, we want you to sit back, relax, enjoy the event, and we are going to start with a poem by Grace Franklin. Grace is a published poet, playwright, actress, and director born in Oklahoma City. She is a community activist rallying against violence against Black women. She is the co-founder of Oklahoma Artists for Justice, OA4J, who has been seen on Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera, and BBC America. She received the Woman of Action Award for the National Organization of Women. Ms. Franklin is committed to the spiritual, political, and physical liberation of women of color through advocacy, community work, and policy changes. Please welcome Grace to the stage.
I'm just gonna go down there and take it and bring it back like nothing happened. So this poem is about every Black mother who did that, every Black parent who stood in front of it from the east side of Oklahoma to downtown Oklahoma City to get for their children. And this is called For My Daughters. For my daughters, I would endure the danger of wolves to acquire the linen needed for their backs. I am a warrior trained in the ancient art of thriving during the attempted famine of oppression that sucks the dignity out of daily duties. The unspoken barriers of segregation are displayed in signs with whites only, sending colors to the side to spend money that's green. I've meditated and focused on my peace to hold my dignity. The future doesn't need the venom of the world rubbed into them just to have silk bows. Sunday dresses for little brown special girls are worth the 1,000 cuts to my soul because my soul is anchored in power. Until they are ready to summon the peace, to stand in the midst of darkness and no shadows, never appear without light, they are protected, and so am I. Thank you. Ooh, that's too much for a Saturday morning, my God, okay. Sorry about that. Next poem, or next piece I'm gonna do, so I wanna say some names that developed me as who I am as a person, and I need you all to repeat the names. Just go with it this Saturday morning. Shirley Bobo. Thelma Parks. Sales. That's a restaurant for you all that don't know. Florence's. The pool on 16th.
Yes.
Who knows what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. YWCA McFarland Branch. Geronimo's. Geronimo's. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. And Alberta's Tea Room.
Yes, yes.
Now that's with an asterisk because technically Alberta's Tea Room was not on this side all the time, but the food came from the east side. The brand is from the east side, just FYI. Shout out for Alberta's Tea Room and the chicken tenders. Okay. So these people shaped who I am as a performer, who I am as a person, who I am as an activist. So this next piece is about the first time that I got on stage at the McFarland Branch YWCA under Albert Bostic, Yeah. And in the summertime at the Y, there was a program for children. So my mother, okay, side note, my mother was the director of the McFarland Branch YWCA, who's sitting in the back, all cheesy back there. Hi, Di. So in the summertime, there would be a program for children, and we would swim on the pool on 16th. We would have programs, and Black Incorporated would have workshops. Shout out to Black Incorporated. And so Mr. Bostic put on a play. So we would do a play. So unfortunately, I was cast as the I don't like to call it wicked. I say the alternative thinking witch. And so this is my experience of the summer and of that experience. Little brown children in the sun, playing constantly, loving constantly, laughing constantly. How could you not? How could you not bathe in this joy, bathe in this laughter, bathe in the energy of freedom? And today, I stand upon this stage and give you the best theatrical performance you've ever seen in your life. Probably not, but it's going to be very good. Because I was taught by a man who went to the University of Oklahoma and built and learned and created and crafted when he was the only Black person there. I stand before you as a child of the East Side. I stand before you as a child of oppression and freedom and struggle and light and love and soul food and good things that come on the 1 and the 3. I stand before you with an amen and a hallelujah and choir days and church days that last to 5 p.m. on Sunday. I stand before you with every word that has passed through my body, through my soul, and I'm going to give it to you as the Wicked Witch of the West. I have costume. I have practice. I have a laugh. That's the best I could come up with when I was a child. And at the end, when you stand and you applaud, when I'm standing there thinking, that's for me? All of that's for me? I know who I am. I know that my voice matters. I know that every day when I walk and I talk, I speak with power. And every day I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the people who taught me. I'm thankful for the people that brought me, who loved me, and told me, no, that's not really good enough, baby. You're going to have to practice that a little bit more. Not to minimize me, but to lift me up. So the applause became what I needed, and performance became who I am. And for that, Mr. Bostic, I'm dope. Thank you. Well, good evening, afternoon, I don't know what time it is, work with me. I'm an artist, I have weird hours. How's everybody doing? Okay, so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a poem for you, and then I'm going to do a story-ish thing happening, and that's what's going to occur. But first I want to say thank you to BlackSpace Oklahoma for having this series. And bringing people back into this space, particularly after it has been preserved and reserved in a way that it didn't have to be, right? So this could be like a coffee shop or something. It didn't have to be this. So I want to say thank you for those who fought hard, Gina, to keep this space historical and intact. And that's the fight that we have on the east side of Oklahoma, is to keep things intact and understand how they are useful in the future and maintain the history. Also thankful for the ancestors, for my people who grew up here on the east side. Who's from the east side? Oh, raise your hand up. Boom, all right. We're gonna name some things in just a second. One of the things that I love growing up on the east side of Oklahoma City is all the stories that you get. And all the times you drive in the car with someone who's older than you and they say, yeah, that used to be a barbecue place or a beauty shop. That was the shoe store where they made your shoes. And you're like, they made your shoes? Yes, they made your shoes in this store. Why couldn't you just go to the store and get the shoes? Because we didn't. And that was kind of when you were little, they would just say, we just didn't. They made the shoes in the store. Well, why don't you just go to the store and buy a suit? Mr. Such and Such was the tailor, and he made your suits. And it's like, oh, okay, that's nice. And then you become older and you understand that it was segregated. And there was a reason why the east side of Oklahoma City was very insulated. It was because, there was no going downtown to get stuff. I mean, you could, but there was a lot of shenanigans involved. So instead of doing that, the community was built. So everything that we needed was here. So when I became older, I questioned my mother about that. So I became older and I'm radical. I'm like, yeah, fight the power. And then I was asking her about her stories of getting, because once you watch Eyes on the Prize, you think that every Black experience trying to desegregate is like that. And that didn't quite happen here. It was different because of Clara Luger and her forethought and how to protest by using children instead of large adults, but using children. And I asked my mother, I was like, so how was it sitting at the counter? She's like, I didn't sit at the counter. I was like, what? It became confusing. But one of the questions I had was, well, how did you get clothes? If you've never experienced, and one of the things she would say is, I never experienced direct, the direct racism, the signs. Having to go around. She's like, I never experienced that as a child. And I didn't understand that until she explained that my grandmother would go downtown to J.A. Brown's by herself, get the clothes, and bring them back home. So they never had to go, which I thought was amazing. So for your daughters, for your children, so they wouldn't have to see it, they wouldn't have to endure it, they wouldn't have to touch it, they wouldn't have to smell it, they wouldn't have to feel it.
Now, please welcome to the stage Ms. Christina Beatty. Christina, yes, round of applause. Oklahoma Arts Council. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Managerial Studies from Rice University and a Master of Arts in Social Service Administration from the University of Chicago. Christina brings over 15 years of community planning, organizing, and development experience, having worked in the Chicago on the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, the Black Metropolis National Heritage Area and Great Migration Centennial campaigns, and for the University of Chicago's Arts and Public Life Initiative. Her work for the Arts Council includes oversight of the agency's community arts grants programs, cultural district initiative, performing artist roster, and O'Neill, standing for Oklahoma's New and Emerging Arts Leaders Network. She is passionate about the role that arts, historic preservation, and authentic cultural expression can play in community development. Please welcome again Ms. Christina Beatty.
The community history and storytelling methods we shared all month long can be translated into design. I want to begin to frame our conversation by describing some of the processes and professions that shape the places we inhabit each day. I am so grateful for BlackSpace and the vision to provide more exposure to the planning and design professions, and to engage community members in the process of shaping our own neighborhoods in ways that reflect, celebrate, and improve our lived experiences of being Black in Oklahoma. The multifaceted nature of planning and design fields is illustrated by the fact that the University of Oklahoma's College of Architecture is actually home to 7 different divisions. They include architecture, construction science, environmental design, interior design, landscape architecture, regional and city planning, and urban design. All of these fields and others impact our built environment, the space that we occupy and live in each and every day. Okay, I'm gonna give a signal to change the slides. So, Melissa, could you Go to the next slide. Or I can just talk, that's fine too. Regional and city planning takes a broad look at the challenges that face our cities, towns, and rural areas. Planners investigate policy, the way that city streets and public spaces such as parks are laid out, and the types of buildings and activities that make cities vibrant. Urban design focuses on the aesthetics and physical features of neighborhoods and public spaces within a city of town. And so in terms of scale, kind of the images I was hoping to show were really regional and city planning is kind of a big picture overview. You're looking at really large areas of land. Whereas urban design, you're scaling in to look maybe at the neighborhood scale or to look, block by block on maybe a smaller few block basis. Architecture then focuses on the design of individual buildings and how buildings, oh, there we go. Okay, so that's regional city planning, that's urban design. And then architecture focuses on the design of individual buildings and how buildings can both reflect the identity of the neighborhood and influence the neighborhood at the same time. Architecture provides the building blocks for city planning. Architecture provides the building blocks for urban design, and in turn, urban design provides the building blocks for city planning. Real estate developers are business people. Next slide, please. Real estate developers are business people engaged in the process of identifying land, finding designers and contractors, and securing the financing to purchase that land and actually execute the project. Next slide. Public art is generally large in scale and displayed outside. Public art reflects our culture and gives more meaning and interest to public spaces. Next slide. Placemaking is the improvement of public spaces by and for community members. Project for Public Spaces describes it this way. More than just promoting better urban design, placemaking facilitates creative patterns of use, paying particular attention to the physical, cultural, and social identities that define a place and support its ongoing evolution. With community-based participation at its center, an effective placemaking process capitalizes on a local community's assets, inspiration, and potential, and it results in the creation of quality public spaces that contribute to people's health, happiness, and well-being. Although individuals might focus on a single discipline, such as architecture, placemaking, or planning, they are most successful in their work when they understand the various fields and work across those disciplines. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Hans Butzer. Hans is an architect, educator, urban designer, and developer who exercises his passion for crafting buildings and places for people through teaching and practice. Hans is the co-founder of Butzer Architects and Urbanism, together with his wife, Tori A. Butzer. Together, their collaborations have earned awards from the American Institute of Architects, American Society of Landscape Architects, and the Urban Land Institute, among others. Notable collaborations, such as the Oklahoma City National Memorial, Skydance Bridge, and Sliver, exemplify Hans's ambitions for performance-based architecture that is fiscally, environmentally, and socially sustainable. Alongside his practice, Hans is Dean of the University of Oklahoma's Christopher C. Gibbs College of Architecture, where he has taught since 1999 as Professor of Architecture and Urban Design. He holds the A. Wayne Emel Jr. Professorship and the Mabry Presidential Professorship. His teaching and research focuses on resilience as an extension of ethics, efficiency, community, and design. Hans is the recipient of the American Institute of Architects Thomas Jefferson Award for Public Architecture in recognition of his longstanding efforts through his private practice and university teaching to improve Oklahoma City's urban and social environs. Please welcome Hans Butzer.
Thank you, Christine, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Gina and Deborah, for taking this on. There's something beautiful about being naive with big ideas and early going. You just have no idea what you're getting yourself into. But I'm up here wearing a few hats, certainly as an architect and urban designer, but also as dean of the Gibbs College, as Christina mentioned. I want to give a shout out also not only to Gina, but also to Vanessa. Where are you, Vanessa? There you are. We're so happy that both Gina and Vanessa are affiliated faculty of the Gibbs College of Architecture. We're big believers in the power of BlackSpace Oklahoma, and we'd like to think that this is just the beginning, right? So I wanted to share some of our work in a way of describing all the layers that it might take to get a project going. And the reason we're talking about a project in the context of Paige Woodson is because this is a project, and it's ongoing. And I'm going to share a little bit more about the story of Paige Woodson, this building, and hopefully what will become a fulfilled vision over the years. But it really takes so many layers to get something to happen and to finish it. And so I'll just dance upon some of our previous work, collaborations, just to kind of give you a feel for what it might take to complete the vision here at Paige Woodson. I think it's also important to recognize that there are many different ways in which we can listen and tell stories. Certainly as a lover of people and their stories, both Tori and I use the stories of people as a basis, as a foundation for all of our work. But we also see the stories through buildings, through public spaces. We see stories being told through maps, through what's left over of a community, for example. So there's so many different ways in which stories can be told, but maybe more importantly, there's so many different ways in which we can listen. And I hope that's one of the key themes that you take from a few items that I'll be sharing today. Christina mentioned it earlier. All the work that I'm sharing here is the product of collaboration. Certainly at its nucleus, a collaboration between my collaborator in all things, Tori. We just had an implicit bias training at the college yesterday, thanks to Dr. Sherry Urban, who joined us. But there's always a tendency to assume that since I'm the guy up here sharing the work, that it's my work. And I just want to be very clear and explicit. This is our work, but it's perhaps even more importantly, it's the work of so many others that go into sharing the stories, helping us uncover the stories, and making them something very real. And the team that we work with most closely in our office, is a team that varies in so many different sizes and shapes and forms and so forth. But it's just a very important point here to remember. The work being shared here is it's a project of many, not of one. It's never of one. It's always many. So the spaces that I'll be sharing a little bit about are the Oklahoma City National Memorial, the Oklahoma City Skydance Bridge, the Overhater Episcopal Center in Watonga, Western Oklahoma, Oklahoma City Scissortail Park, and then finally Paige Woodson. And for each one, I'll offer a very brief synopsis of the layers that go into helping make a project happen, and a few glimpses of each of those stories, each of these projects. Starting with the Oklahoma City National Memorial, it's a project, as many of us can recall, perhaps too tragically, something that started in 1995, but it quickly gained momentum, and the community rallied, and they are really the reason that we created here in Oklahoma City a national memorial. But most importantly, it was a multi-step process. It took many layers. This is one of the fastest national memorials ever created, and it happened in only 5 years. And it was criticized for actually moving too quickly. But perhaps the best part was that it involved a 350-member task force. Tori and I met regularly over the years of the development of the design that came about in a 2-stage international competition with all 350 folks in that community. And they represented all corners of this community. And we adapted the design based on the feedback, recognizing that there was so much more that others could help us better understand. And the funding, right, which is probably one of the more important invisible components of a project, came from many different sources. It came through grants, mostly through private donations, right? Many, many millions of dollars went into helping fund the National Memorial, the Institute for the Prevention of Terrorism, and the museum. The image on the left is the document, the mission statement that 350-member task force created. You can imagine how complicated it is to get 350 people to begin to agree on something, but miraculously they did. And it was that document that guided our work. And the most simple way of defining that document is here in the preamble of the Oklahoma City National Memorial, which you now see inscribed on the gates. We come here to remember those who were killed, those who survived, and those changed forever. May all who leave here know the impact of violence. May this memorial offer comfort, strength, peace, hope, and serenity. And even though the design that we submitted, was selected through 2 stages, unanimous selection of a jury consisting of primarily local community members, we continue to adapt, as I mentioned earlier. So we had many, many meetings. It was all about collaboration. It continued to evolve, right? And this is what you see today. And it is still a project that continues to evolve. It takes on different significance over the years, and certainly with intention over the season. The voice of our future. The Oklahoma City Skydance Bridge is a project that came about in a very different way. Yes, it was still part of some sort of competitive process. First, an international call for teams interested in helping shape this bridge, which was intended to intellectually or abstractly, as well as literally, connect the community together, north and south, and east and west. And it was a project that once selected through a jurying process, continued to evolve again through input from many agencies and had many different funding sources. But like the memorial, which was about telling the story of tragedy and all those who got caught unknowingly, unwittingly, and perhaps unwillingly in a tragic event, Skydance Bridge is perhaps on the other side of the spectrum. It's about trying to define the community and what it wants to be. So we look to the sky, we look to the ground, the landscapes, and to the built artifacts of Oklahoma to find an inspiration for that bridge, starting first with these earliest sketches, learning from a seagull and translating that into what the state bird, the scissor-tailed flycatcher, can teach us, and taking that all the way into a project finally built that is now a symbol of Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma Episcopal Center, which many of you probably have never visited out in western Oklahoma, is a project that is also the result of trying to understand the community, its identity, a complex identity, partly about Western Episcopal faith, partly about a Native American Cheyenne Arapaho community, and how those merged together in the Western Plains. This project took over 10 years, and also, like the others, continues to evolve with many different funding sources. They basically had to find grants to help pay for this themselves. But it took first a vision to help it come about. And the first thing they said to us is that they wanted this church, this place, to look like a teepee, which we thought would have certain challenges. You can only fit so many people in there. That was a joke. So we tried to turn it around and really think of it in terms of how we could learn from the TV, and how could we learn from the community founder and his paintings, his storybooks that are now at the Smithsonian, to develop a design through many layers, many meetings, trying to understand how this place could serve the community over the seasons, how it could be based on the Native American way of anchoring a place in the Z-axis in the landscape, and building with materials that are not elaborate, right, but rather very fundamentally sound and very sustainable into a design that learns from the TV. And Scissortail Park, which is currently in construction. Right? This project started in 2009, and it's far from finished. And it's, again, many, many steps in the process. So much about the public deciding they want this to happen. Many meetings, many votes, and funding largely from a penny sales tax, which you and I all helped to pay for. And it's inspired by the story of how we settled this Oklahoma landscape. And it builds on this 1889 narrative from Harper's Weekly, this idea of these campfires in the dark landscape, just as the land run started. And this will be a place, this part will finish actually late this year, which we all can enjoy. It's always important to remember the most important work of any of those in the planning and design professions, the most important space is public space. That is where the greatest equity can be achieved, right? Buildings are only there to define the edges of public space. And that's why we need to pay the most important attention to public space. This auditorium is public space, and the space outside our window here hopefully will become one day an important public space, a place of equity. There you see the lantern in the Oklahoma landscape, soon to be finished later this year. And then finally, Page Woodson, something that we all hope will be a place of equity. Right? This project started in 2014, as far as I can recall. Gina, you may have other recollections, but I remember sitting having breakfast with Ron Bradshaw, the key developer here, and he said, Hans, I think we have another project to start working on together. And so we did. And that has been a very prolonged, but probably not long enough, really. To do things right, it takes time. It's like a fine wine. We have to be patient, right? We have to really want it. But we continue to find ways to pay for this project and future projects around it. But again, it takes buy-in, and it takes passion. But really, I want to close with just focusing on what I hope becomes a very important public space, a place of equity. And again, literally, it's just outside the windows when you go outside the door here. This is the view from the stairwell when you go leave out the auditorium, right? This is looking to the south, towards 4th Street, from the windows of Page Woodson. And what we hope to achieve is a place that's about this auditorium as an enclosed public space, as well as an outdoor public space. Oops. Right? And I think what's important to remember here, and this, we captured this from Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, former student of this great school, right? There's something to remember about the power of the space that awaits us outside, right? It's waiting for us to uncover it. But for the project that started here, that led to this renovation, award-winning renovation, in fact, was looking first at sandworm maps, looking at the history. These are from the early volumes that trace the fabric, the patterns, urban patterns of Oklahoma City. You see here what was originally Douglas High School. And closing in now, new buildings started to evolve. And you can kind of see the current footprint outside. Strap tries to build on that old footprint, right? But it was built in 1910, first as Lowell School, then as, and its name evolved, sorry, it's a little touchy here, right? But the name continued to change, but what it represented only evolved, right? But Dr. Inman Page was the first key principal in 1915, and he had a daughter Zelia Bro, who started the music program here at Douglas High in 1923. Right? And we all know about the Douglas High School Band. We have Miss Bro to thank for that. I'll never forget one of the most exciting New Year's at opening night downtown was when the Douglas High Band was just walking up and down the streets of downtown Oklahoma City a few years ago. It was bitter cold. The best part was the Douglas High Band just playing and celebrating the new year. It was just beautiful to see it weave through our downtown. But Miss Bro's classes inspired Jimmy Rushing's future work in his role in Count Basie's orchestra. Right? Charlie Christian studied under Bro, right, and became one of the first true electric guitar soloists. And of course, as I mentioned, Ralph Ellison. Right? Yes, music was good. Writing, maybe even more powerful. Right? Invisible stories, visible stories. By 1954, it was the F.D. Moon Middle School, and then later, as we know today, Page Woodson School. Right? By 1993, sadly, the school was abandoned. So this project started after 21 years of being abandoned, right? Ron Bradshaw, his son Jason, Gina, and so many others helped bring it together. But again, the building in which we enjoy today's session is only what I hope to be beginning, right? And this is how we saw back in 2014. You see here the downtown, 4th Street is a very important connection, right? And the area that we were privileged enough to begin to master plan. Here you see the footprint of the school as it was when we started, right? Streets have been cut off. All the former houses that once surrounded the school disappeared. So the first steps that we started to outline were related to rebuilding those streets, to bring access, to make everyone be able to get to the school very easily, right? To reintegrate it with the community. And then we started to develop a plan of urban edges, right? So it's not about the buildings, but about the edges that they create, right? And shape what we hope one day will become a plaza, a public space, where as you drive by from 4th Street looking northwards, you focus on Page Woodson School, the main entry doors here to the auditorium, but to create an outdoor public space that connects with the indoor public space, to create what we really envision is this grand place of equity, of storytelling. So when we started to lay out this vision in 2015, we started to think about all the different ways in which you could animate this space, places for eating, places for play, spaces for commemoration, for storytelling, and a place that would connect with the auditorium itself. And you can see here, if you look to the north, the display of these building edges on the east as it opens up and really announces Page Woodson as this seminal, this focal space. And you can begin again to imagine in 3 dimensions. These are just examples of what that place could become. So this again is that view from 4th Street looking north, the entry doors to the auditorium. And then when you begin to fill in, this is a very abstract idea of creating these buildings here along 4th Street with active ways of bringing back retail, right? Maybe new stories unfold, places where we hang out and gather, that building that starts to shape what hopefully will become this community space. Go back again. Right. It's really important to think of this as an addendum to the auditorium, indoor and outdoor places for storytelling. Now we know that every project requires funding, a framework in which to get things done, and people to stand behind it. And to help create this public space outside, we know there is no money right now. Okay? The framework may be evolving, right? And that's where hopefully Gina and BlackSpace Oklahoma and others can help create that forum through which we can work to gather up all the stories, the ideas, and to engage civic leaders, and so forth, to help find this piece, to make it work, right? We've got the people, the framework is evolving, and hopefully we can capture this part to create this public space, right? A place of identity, a place for continued storytelling, where all may participate. Thank you very much.
Projects. He is well known for Project Row Houses in Houston's historic 3rd Ward, one of the oldest African American neighborhoods. On this project, Rick worked with community artists to rehabilitate buildings and infrastructure for art programs and social engagement. The project was awarded a silver medal by the Rudy Bruner Awards in Urban Excellence. Other community projects he has contributed to include Watts House Project in Los Angeles, Borough Project in Charleston, and Transformer projects in New Orleans. Currently, Rick is leading and working alongside Tulsa artists on the Greenwood Art Project, funded by the Bloomberg Philanthropies 2018 Public Art Challenge. The project will commemorate the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre and Black Wall Street. Rick has been the recipient of numerous awards, including a MacArthur Fellowship, an appointment to the National Council on the Arts by President Barack Obama in 2013, a Lead Fellowship at Harvard, and a Mel Kine Fellowship at MIT. Please welcome Rick Lowe.
That's important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. I'm going to get right into it because we're already we're going to be late, so don't blame me for being for lunch being late. But so I got a lot of stuff to show, and so I'm just going to go right to it and try to get through as much as possible in as fast a time as possible. So I did I go backwards? No. Uh-oh. It's okay. It is? What am I clicking? Might need these. These might help. These might help. Oh, okay, great. Yeah. Did it help though? No? Okay. All right. So I was trained, let me just go back a little bit further. Born and raised in rural Alabama. And you know, was subjected to, or actually had the opportunity to really understand the idea of, you know, what injustice means and how it impacts people's lives. And so from there, I went to art school and studied art, but there was a sense of always a tendency toward activism. And so I was challenged in my early career trying to figure out how to bring those two things together, activism and art. And it wasn't until the early 1990s that I stumbled upon this guy's, this terminology from this artist, Joseph Beuys, who coined the term social sculpture and defined it as the way what you can see, you can read it there. But anyway, what was really interesting about that was that it offers this opportunity for kind of individual initiative as an artist, but also collective action. And so a lot of my work deals with this play between, how do we maximize the individual initiative of an artist, and an artist could be anybody in the context of social sculpture, but elevating that initiative in the context, though, of social production. And so these projects that I'm going to show basically 3-4 projects that will kind of talk about that. The first one is Project Row Houses in Houston, which was my first opportunity to start thinking about social sculpture and really, trying to play it out. And it exists in a underinvested neighborhood in Houston called the Third Ward. And basically the idea was that the community activists at that time thought these houses was a serious problem, and they were advocating to have them all torn down. But through my process of kind of looking around and thinking about them, I made a connection, a strange little connection that came about coincidentally, that the works of this artist, John Biggers, who did a lot of paintings about these shotgun houses, and basically kind of created a different narrative about the shotgun house. Now, the old narrative was that shotgun houses, slave quarters, and all that kind of negative stuff. But John Biggers had traced the origin of the shotgun house to West Africa. West Africa, and that it moved along with the slave trade into the West Indies, the southern part of the U.S., and then throughout. So that was a particularly interesting narrative for someone like me, coming from the South and not really exposed to that. And I thought, this is something that maybe we could build on and to create a different narrative that could impact how people see the communities that they live in. And so I went forward with this kind of personal initiative, but in a way that I had to use the social sculpture format of bringing people into the process to help bring it about. And so in this process, it's a huge amount of people. There's artists, architects, planners, designers, historians, developers, social workers, all kinds of people coming into this, because the idea was to take these little 22 shotgun houses in this neighborhood that folks said were the worst in the entire neighborhood and they wanted them torn down, to re-envision it as something that could speak symbolically to how we could care for our neighborhoods. And so in that process, there were several elements that I kind of picked up from John Biggers' paintings about the value of these shotgun houses or shotgun communities. There were basically 4 that I started to work from. One was that he talked about the importance of architecture. Architecture is extremely important in building good communities. The second thing was art, creativity, and culture. The third was education, and the fourth is social safety net. And so with that framework, I started to think about how to build this thing back. So the first thing was just to honor the architecture, to clean it up and show the beauty of the architecture that John Biggers had shown them in his paintings. And then to really try to infuse a sense of creativity into the process. Out of the 22 houses we dedicated, at that time it was 8 houses that we dedicated for a revolving kind of creative energy of artists and creative thinkers to do small residencies and to produce work that engaged the community, to kind of help the community see their potential for creativity. We're very fortunate that Joachim was one of our first fellows, and we've developed a fellowship program to move this art and creative engagement forward. But that was a big part of the beginning, that was to say, we're going to honor the architecture because that speaks to the community from a visual standpoint. And then we're going to allow artists to teach us how to engage with people, to share the possibilities of creativity even in their own lives. How do they open that up? Just so I'm going to flip through that. The previous image was just inside of a couple of the houses. This is another project by an artist creating kind of mapping. Created this little passport of the neighborhood. Then there's the education part. Because of so many young people around, it just was a natural thing to develop a after-school and summer education program for youth in the neighborhood, and teaching them about the neighborhood and how to reclaim spaces. So this was an actual little project that they worked on, that they reclaimed 5 little houses in the neighborhood as a youth effort. Now, so we had these 22 houses. We started out with 8 doing art projects and a couple of them administrative, and then there were the education houses. So we had 7 remaining houses, and the question was, what do we do with them? And the conventional wisdom would have been, yeah, you just do some artist residencies, right? That makes sense, we're artists. But it didn't quite feel right because we wanted to respond specifically to the things that were happening in the neighborhood. And someone said to us at some point, they said, while, this art stuff is great and you're doing an education program for youth, that's all good. We said, but, people need housing in this neighborhood. I mean, the housing stock was old, people were tearing it down. And so that kind of spun an opportunity for us to look at a need around housing that we could address in a symbolic way. Someone suggested to us that there was a large amount of single mothers within the neighborhood. That was a predominant, the predominant households were single mothers. So we decided we would do a transitional housing program for single mothers. And the idea around this program was to create a housing environment that spoke symbolically to how we should treat those that are less off. This is the social safety net side of what John Biggers talked about. To expose that kind of opportunity to people and help them live up to it. One of the most significant antidotes that came out of this project for me was one of the young women, and I think I'm going to show an image of her later, who was in this program, and she came to me once and she said she didn't understand the whole art thing that we were talking about doing in the neighborhood until one day she realized that she was the art, and she was an artist in transforming her own life. So these are transitional housing and it allows these women to come in and think of themselves, their life, their families, as an art project that they're transforming. And over a period of a year to 2 years. So that's that was the core frame of the project. Dealing with the architecture, art creativity, education, and social safety net. Then that led to a little bit of a broader opportunity to think about architecture that was relevant to the historical context. And you can see in this image here, there's the old houses here. These are some of the new houses that were built over time. And the interesting thing about this, and Hans talking about public space, one of the things that was really interesting for me in working on this project was the play between public and private space. Because as a neighborhood, people want to feel that they have a sense of privacy in the neighborhood, but they also understand that and have a desire for public space. In fact, one of the great things about these little shotgun houses is the way they're designed with this play, right? There's a front porch, which is the more public porch where they greet people along the street. And then there's the back porch that's in a courtyard that's much more private. And so there is this, ingrained in this kind of shotgun community is this notion of public-private and how you balance that out. And so we've always had to kind of think about that in terms of how to move this neighborhood work forward that we're doing. Now, the challenge of something like this, when we started with this project in 1993, there was very little interest in that neighborhood, but over time, more and more people took interest, and this was you can start to see how the little small houses succumb to the larger townhouses. So as a response to that, we started to kind of push on the architecture front to try to create a kind of architectural language through which people could start to think about how, what we thought about the neighborhood and the valuable things that it offered, and hoping that they could adjust to the architectural language that we were offering. Now, I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, but I'm going to switch off to a project that's called Translations. It was in Dallas, Texas. Another, Project Row Houses go for about 25 years. But throughout the time of working on Project Row Houses, there's been a number of other projects that I've worked on, which they all help inform each other. And so this one was in Dallas. It came about in the one in Project Row Houses in Houston came about as just, it's my hometown, and I was, involved with the activists in the town, and I was able to kind of organically grow that. But this one came as an opportunity through an exhibition at the National Sculpture Center, and they asked me if I would participate as one of the artists, 10 artists for their 10th year anniversary. And they chose me though because they wanted to do something that was kind of push the boundaries of sculpture. They were trying to look at sculpture in its broadest sense. And so I brought in the social context of it. They introduced me to this neighborhood called Vickery Meadow. And this is just a little map of it. What was, when they first took me there, it wasn't interesting at all. It was just these kind of old, 1970s style apartment buildings. But then I started, looking at the map and seeing how all of this blue, mostly is all apartments. It was something like, I think it was somewhere between 45 and 50,000 units of apartments in this area. Very dense. And no public amenities. It was like this notion of the 70s, these kind of apartment-style living, where people would, you had the car garages, the pool, the swimming pools, and everything's kind of built into each apartment complex. But of course, over time, the depreciation of the properties, it kind of shift, lower income folks start moving in, and then all of a sudden, it went from being a neighborhood that was considered like a posh, nice neighborhood. In fact, these images are from more recent, so that in the 70s when it was built, everything was kind of posh, right? But then over time, it's less so, and it started to be defined by, crime and violence. And I found it really a particularly interesting thing, because I don't know about you guys, but I had never seen these kind of things in neighborhoods. And it was, it was very intimidating, and I just kind of imagined what it feels like to live in a neighborhood where you kind of watch like that. And so I was trying to struggle with this idea of how did it get there. And then it occurred to me once I started to sit on the streets and kind of see what was happening. What had happened was this neighborhood went from a, completely middle class, predominantly white neighborhood to what had become a predominantly ethnic neighborhood with loads of immigrants and refugees. Vickery Meadow became the place where the International Refugee Committee would place refugees because there were so many apartments. There were always vacancies, so it was real easy to get people in. So then there was a conflict there in mind. It's like, okay, so this is an interesting American dynamic, that we talk about diversity and how much we love diversity. And this is one of the most diverse places I'd ever seen, but it was considered the worst place, in the city. So how do you reconcile that? And what does that mean? So in my research along this thing, I was trying to figure out how to address it, and through lots of, walking the streets, talking to people in meeting halls and that kind of stuff, it occurred to me that one of the big challenges that people have in the neighborhood is that there was no kind of gathering space, no public space. And so consequently, since there wasn't, people kind of stayed in their own little places. But and there was rising crime, and the crime even forced people to stay even more in space. But I bumped into a group of women. I called them the church ladies because they were trying to figure out how to do things to help people. And they wanted to go in a different direction than the city was doing. The city was saying, more policing, more policing, more policing. And they said, well, maybe the problem is that people don't know each other. That's why the crime is up, because people don't know each other. How do we get people to interact? So they started a very small program that was incredibly powerful, where they called it the Mom's Lunch. And they would get together 5 or 6 women from different cultures. They would have somewhere around 5 or 6 different cultures. And they would bring them together to have lunch and talk about, where they came from, share stories and that kind of stuff. I managed to get them to let me go to one. It's an all women's thing, and I respect that space, having worked with a young mothers program at Project Row Houses. But I just wanted to experience it and see what was happening, and I realized something. I was like, there's no vehicle for people to come together to do this. How can we do it? So it kind of came to me that maybe a market would be the idea. How do you, setting up a market for people to have as a point of doing that. And so when I started talking about this market, the question was, what's going to be in the market? So we said, well, we got to figure that out. But it didn't have any value to go out into the broader Dallas community and bring things into a market or whatever for people that live there. That didn't make any sense. We said we got to get the stuff from the people that are here. There has to be people that make things that they want to sell at a market. Then but we couldn't get any response to that because basically those people who make handicraft things, they don't think of it as crafts or whatever, they just make stuff. So it took us a long time to get people to understand what we were doing. So we decided to open a space and start making stuff, you know, and show it visually what that really means. And people start flocking in and the workshops start happening. Initially we started with Dallas-based artists leading the workshop, but very quickly other people from the immigrant community started, you know, leading the workshops. So then we said, okay, now we have to do this marketing. And, you know, we're in Vickery Meadow where there are these police towers and all that stuff, and everybody thinks it's the worst crime place in the city. So no one thought that a market would work. And plus, we moved our project site into the interior of the neighborhood. We wanted to be directly in the middle, not on the edge. So the social service workers and all, they said, well, people are not going to go out because they're afraid. The museum people said, well, our people are not going to go there because they're afraid. And so we said, well, we just have to try it. And we did this first market thing, and it turned out to be, you know, quite amazing to see the people, you know, come. We did it around food, this particular one. We called it the Lucky Pot, and, you know, thinking maybe we could get 4 or 5 different groups to bring food and whatever. But, you know, as the sign-ups started to happen, we had like 18 different groups that brought foods to share. And then we decided we need to, you know, integrate other things into this little marketplace. So and also our kind of, you know, flyers and stuff, you know, not knowing what we're doing, but we're just trying to speak to people. Someone said, you should just put everybody's language on here, you know, just say hello or something in their language so that they see something that's connected to them. And I don't know what half this stuff says, but anyway, it was a way to just kind of, you know, connect with folks. And then, so we did this thing, someone said a talent show, we thought that was a ridiculous idea. It was like a young a teenager that said that. And man, that talent show, it was just like a food thing. You know, we thought, you know, a few people, but it's like, we had over 20-something performers. It went, you know, 2 hours over time, and it became this, and all the crafts and things people started to make began to really, you know, give this neighborhood a push. Now, the one thing that there was actually a lot of artists that were in this community that actually did really interesting work. I mean, there were Iraqi painters and all kinds of people that were making really nice work. And we thought it did a better place than the typical kind of market environment, putting work on a table or whatever. And this is kind of interesting because a friend of mine, Mark Bradford out in LA, he was doing a show at White Cube in London, and he talked about this idea that one of his pieces was going to go for $1 million, and I was like a little blown away, and I was like, whoa, $1 million? He's like, yeah, man, this is like, you know, they've captured the market on this thing, you know, just, you know, talking about the commercial aspects of it just as a white cube, you know, and then I started thinking about how the white cube is kind of like a pedestal, right? You want something to have increased value, you put it on a pedestal. And so I started thinking, I said, well, maybe we should have some white cubes in Vickery Meadow, right? I mean, how can we do that and elevate the value of the people there work? And so I went to a group of architects and I said, you know, I have this idea, like, can we get a white cube? You know, just design a white, you know, maybe just 12 by 12 foot square, but I want the inside to just feel like a little gallery space. And we want to place them along the street where, as I've said before, there was no public amenities along the street. And the thing about the shift in this neighborhood is that when it was built early on, it was built around folks driving their cars in and out of the neighborhood when they needed things, and then they had everything they needed within their apartment complex when they were there. But with the immigrants and refugees, they needed the street. You know, they were, you know, kind of moving back and forth along the street. So we thought doing these little white cubes along the street would kind of enhance this opportunity for people to have a more public space in an ongoing way. So these architects came back with, it was amazing. You know, they came with me with these really nice little boxes that we kind of placed throughout. And we were able to use these spaces to curate exhibitions that move people along the streets. And what was interesting about the spaces is that they sometimes function as, gallery space, but they also function as bus shelters, for people that are waiting on the bus. They have a place to go inside. And of course, they became the gathering place for all kind of, public activities throughout. This project closed a little over a year ago. It was kind of a little bit of a victim of its own success, in which it started to shift the view of this neighborhood, and the market kind of started to come in and push, and it started the rent started to go up. International Refugee Committee couldn't afford to place people there. It's a complicated things that happened there. But it continued to run programs that focused on the needs of the immigrant community. Now, that particular project led me to another project that I've generated, and it's still ongoing, through the international exhibition. It's called Documenta. Documenta is an exhibition that happens every 5 years. Normally it happens in Kassel, Germany, but this last edition was both Kassel and Athens, Greece. And so, since I've been working with immigrants in the Dallas project, when I went to Athens, I ended up going there in June of 2015. That was a pivotal month in Greece. I mean, they had their referendum, whether they were going to leave the EU, the economic collapse, the refugees were coming in. It was completely crazy. I mean, that town was like on fire. And so when I was invited to look at a project, of course, that was something I was thinking about. And so I ended up going to this neighborhood that's called Victoria Square. Victoria Square is a funny little place just to the north of the downtown area of Athens. And for some reason, it became known for all the refugees, particularly from the Middle East coming in, it was known as the place you wanted to be. And I remember one young woman was saying that, a teenage girl, she was saying how when she was in a camp, I think in, I can't remember the camp she was in, before she made it to Greece, she would always hear about Victoria Square. And she wanted to get there because in her mind she had this idea, because people talked about it in such wonderful ways. She thought glass towers, waterfalls, and all this kind of stuff, And then she got there and she saw this, It was basically just a little square where people were coming. But she realized that it was a place, though, where people could come and make connection. They could make, it was a very public kind of space. But that square triggered a dynamic in Greece that, continues to today. I mean, Greece was not a diverse culture for the most part. And all of a sudden now, you've got all these people from different parts of the world coming. And in this particular square, when they started to camp out in the square, the business people couldn't do business. So the business folks actually, this is just typical of the square, and folks in the square, but the business owners, okay. So if you see this language here, on every storefront in the square was that it says for sale. And basically what the business owners were doing, they were trying to put pressure on the mayor to do something about the camps that were kind of set up in the square because they couldn't do business. They were saying they have to sell their businesses if they couldn't. And that created a kind of this dynamic between the people in the square, the refugees, and then the native Greek business owners. Now, like in most places, there are some people that are compassionate, so there were people that were going out, serving food, giving clothing and stuff. But then the fascist party, this party of the Golden Dawn, were sending people out to beat people up. So it's this constant kind of flow there. And so I had this idea of thinking, of trying to figure out how you can create a situation where people can have a conversation. And so through a series of, kind of going around, checking out neighborhood and stuff, so this is the square here. And we started just kind of mapping the business folks and trying to figure out who they were, what were the different assets that the refugees could be, the immigrants and refugees could be directed to. But in the process, though, what I realized was that more than anything, there needed to be some kind of space that was intentional about people coming together, almost like the mom's lunch that folks were doing in Dallas, or the market that we were doing there also. And so I found this little space, which was, as my practice, architecture becomes a key part of what the work is all about, because I think it's the vehicle through which you can kind of navigate these social interactions. And so I have to be very careful, though, about how to find the proper space. And so as Hans talked about designing space, I kind of work at it from the side of kind of making space, right? So taking the informal gathering of people and figuring out how you make that space. It's not designed out, it's just kind of made through the social interactions. But there's a careful consideration there for me. So when I was looking for space, and I had people kind of helping me look, obviously we were looking around the square here. But one of the things I did, there's a train station exit here. And I would sit there and watch the people move from this train, and I would just follow them. And what I started to realize was a lot of people would get off, these are the main streets here, and a lot of people would get off, and they wouldn't go this way, and they wouldn't go all the way down here. They would go this way and down this way. And I was starting to go, and I realized something. I was like, well, so the people would go this way because it's less traffic, it's more pedestrian, and it's a quiet way, so they want to stay off the main street as much as possible. Then I realized at the very corner there was this old building here. And what I liked about this building was it had these big open windows, which you don't see a lot in Athens, or at least particularly in the neighborhood level, because people are worried about crime and that kind of stuff, so everything's always barred up and stuff. But this is these big windows here, it's full of graffiti and stuff, and I said, this is the spot, because what we could do is we could take people as they're moving from here in a quiet space and capture their attention as you can't capture it right on the square. And so we took this space and just started to slowly evolve it around the things that people from the neighborhood could bring to it. I mean, folks would bring us furniture, folks brought us silk screening material, and just started doing workshops there. And I play a lot of dominoes. That's one of my kind of mainstays that I do within a community context. And I find myself doing it in many different places. This is a group of Albanians that they play a very different kind of dominoes than I play. And I don't speak their language, they don't speak my language, but we just learn to communicate through the process of dominoes. And but then we started to host these more, organized, workshops and constantly stuff. And it's become this hub of places for people to come together and share. So you have the Greek natives sharing their things and the immigrants are involved in that, and then you have the immigrants doing their things, the Greek natives are there. And importantly, though, was that the space is fairly small, but we've been able to transform the street, and the street becomes a part of of what we're able to do there. It's not just within the space. So this is a great project that we ended up doing early on to start to get the business folks to start talking to each other and communicating. We ended up doing this little newspaper called One to One, where we interview 2 business owners each and bring them into conversation with each other, and they would have because many of these folks, they don't talk to each other, and that's kind of normal though for folks that are running small businesses. They're so caught up in doing their work, they can't really get out. But anyway, this is more street stuff, and just using the street, using the public space for a different kind of cultural dialogue to happen. This exhibition space, and then taking all these opportunities of getting people together, and then getting people who have more trained minds to be able to sift through that information and think about how do we articulate this from an architectural planning perspective. And this project being such a small little part of the city has become hugely significant in the political race. In fact, on the 20th of April, the next mayoral forum is going to happen on this street with all the candidates here. But in this instance, there's the mayor that's here on the site. This is the president of the opposition party who's likely to become the next prime minister. You know, so folks want to be around this context where it's talking about this diversity that they're interested in. Now, quickly, so this is back to Project Horizon to just kind of show a little bit of the broader impact. I started out talking about these 22 little shotgun houses, which is here, which is expanded out in different places throughout. And so it kind of, kind of dots throughout the third ward area. And actually, I should probably leave it to Yakub to talk about that because I haven't been so connected in the last couple of years, and Yakub basically kind of took my place because he was doing all the field research there, and he could probably have a lot more to talk about. But these are just examples of, after 25 years, real estate prices. I mean, look at that kind of dip. I mean that rise there from $1 a square foot to $55 a square foot. It's huge impact. And so, continually trying to use the sensibilities of a project that operates like a brain stem for the neighborhood. To start looking at opportunities and possibilities of what's happening. I'm not going to go through the specifics of this because it's a lot of this kind of technical stuff. But I will say this: while the kind of dealing with the whole gentrification stuff, we've had to build an apparatus around that. We formed a group called the Emancipation Economic Development Council, which is made up of churches and organizations, a bunch of folks, which has grown outside of Project Row Houses, which is kind of nice. And but I always like to reinforce the fact that even though when the projects get big like that, it's still I still like to look at how the individuals play a role. Right? You notice in the Joseph Beuys quote, he talks about social sculpture, but he says everybody is an artist. And so my goal is always to figure out how to find the artists in everybody within these neighborhood contexts. And so this is an example of a guy who used to come by and play his saxophone all the time. Most people call him just kind of a strange, weird guy. But I started to notice at some point how he was, in his own way, he was playing this role, right? I captured him a number of times when there were lots of buildings that were burning in the neighborhood at one point, and he would always manage to find them playing the saxophone. So, it's almost like he was playing like the last song for these buildings. And so I made just a poster. This is a poster, and I started putting it out just to show him in a different context. And that was kind of interesting. But then I took it a little bit further with this guy. His name is Eugene Howard. He called himself brother-in-law. And he was a very interesting guy. He'd been in prison for 20-something years, came back to the neighborhood. He didn't know how to read or write, so not a lot of opportunities for him. But someone told him that if he wanted to stay out of prison, he should go and hang out around Project Row Houses with people who were doing positive things. So he would come and hang out. And before long, he started doing things like he would, take the trash out, he'd sweep, he'd clean, and do all kinds of stuff. And eventually I started giving him a little money here and there to, just to show a little appreciation. And a couple of years passed. And I started thinking about this guy, and if you look at him, look at this guy's face, this guy has a smile, a winner smile, and there's some quality about him, And so I thought, let's talk to him. I said, brother-in-law, if you could start your life over, what would you have done with your life? I said, well, I like cooking, maybe I would have had a cafe. And that kind of rung true because one of the things, whenever I would give him money for doing stuff, he would always come back with these big plates of barbecue, with a big smile on his face and all. And I would always tell him that he didn't have to because, I like doing that, And so I thought, let's make an image of this guy in his dream scenario. Let's make him, kind of paint a picture of him the way that he thinks of himself. So then we ended up doing this image of him as a poster, right? It was just a simple poster. And, and the poster was just kind of placed around the neighborhood and stuff. And it was amazing what it did for this guy, Kind of, all of a sudden, he wasn't just this guy that was a nobody. he was brother-in-law. And, people would recognize him. Oh, yeah, that's brother-in-law, blah, 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 and that kind of stuff. And so eventually we ended up it just kind of exploded with him, right? He became the person that we would actually, commission to cook things for us at different events, and, ended up getting aprons and hats and mugs and this whole little industry around brother-in-law. And he passed away some years ago, but this was for about 4 or 5 years. This guy went from being, somebody that was that the system just says, let's wait until we can go back into the prison, to being somebody that was contributing greatly to the neighborhood. This is another one. I'm going to kind of move past this one for the sake of time. But this one I'll spend a little bit of time on because I spoke of her earlier. She's the one that was, helped me understand, or she understood herself as being an art project, that she was transforming herself. I met her at this stage when she was an activist, a very angry, frustrated woman. And it was when we were just starting our Young Mothers program. She applied. I couldn't understand why she would apply because she was a black nationalist. She was from that movement, all white people are the devil, and that kind of thing. And we had a broad base of support, strongly African American, but there were supporters from different places. And I thought, she's not going to work. But there was the group that was putting this together, and it was actually led by a woman of German descent. And they came back to me with a list of first women, and they said she was in it. I was like, okay, well, good luck with that. But and it was interesting to see her. She got into that program, and just see how the anger kind of started to, shed off. She was quiet, and at this time she was one of those loud people I knew. She always had something to say. She was always very loud. And but all of a sudden she got in this program, she became quiet, and she was just kind of listening and stuff. And then through this time we realized that she was incredibly smart. So she was on academic probation at the University of Houston when we started. She ended up getting her finishing her degree there, with professors pushing her to go to graduate school. Ended up getting into a PhD program at Penn State, and graduating there. I mean, she just kind of transformed. I mean, she really sculpted herself in a way that was absolutely amazing. And out of that, though, after a few years in Pittsburgh, teaching in Pittsburgh after she finished graduate school, she came back to Houston because she wanted to work in the community that helped her transform. And so when she came back, I was talking to the mayor once about her, and the mayor said, we need to take advantage of people like that. They need to be a part of what we do. And so the mayor ended up appointing her to the housing authority. The Houston Housing Authority. And I don't know how housing authorities work here, but in Houston it's really just kind of a place for white developer guys that kind of sit around and talk about how they're going to develop here and there and that kind of stuff. And it was amazing to see her, the only woman, the only black person on that on the housing authority that moved up the ranks to the vice chair and basically kind of helped transform that place. And she ended up being the chair of the housing transition committee for our newly elected mayor from last year. So, yeah. So she's one of those people that really shows the notion of transforming. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna close out with just a little bit here about Wall Street. Okay, Black Wall Street. We all know Wall Street, right? I mean, New York City. Emma, that's your town. Wall Street, so crispy clear, so beautiful, whatever. We all know it's about money, big money, and it's bullish, right? I mean, that's the Wall Street that we're accustomed to thinking about. And, but then for many of us, who just kind of, know the history of things, there's another Wall Street, this Black Wall Street, that, it's not about the excess and power of Wall Street in New York. It's about, the resilience and power of sustaining oneself. And And this is, obviously, Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa. And I have the privilege of being the lead artist on helping them figure out how to add an art thing for the centennial. The centennial is happening in 2021, and so, these are all images that folks are accustomed to, which I'm surprised at how many people in Tulsa say that they didn't know about it. They weren't taught about this history. But what was most interesting for me in my kind of getting a little deeper understanding of this was that all the history I knew about Black Wall Street in Tulsa prior to this getting involved at this point in time was the massacre. I mean, that's all we know. In fact, if you Google Black Wall Street Tulsa, the only images you get are the images of this. I mean, it's very hard. You have to look really deep, and you can find basically this one image that you can find about the resilience of people and how they rebuilt their place. And so, I'm interested in this this resilience and how people build things up. The history part the massacre part is one that we can mourn and we need to understand that. But I think the other part that's equally as important though is how do we tap into that creativity and that resilience of people that can rebuild a community against so many odds. And this is just kind of my little observations of things. This is a map someone gave me of, I think it's from like 1920 something. This is just a little Google map or whatever of it. But the reason I put this up is to show like there's no street grid whatsoever there. And then what's replacing the street grid, for the most part, is just parking. I mean, there's an incredible amount of parking here, and there's talk about public space. I mean, there's just nothing on that end. But then on this end, which is kind of interesting, is a resurgent, they call it the Arts District. But nobody acknowledges it as Greenwood, which is kind of interesting. So within this Bloomberg, we got this Bloomberg grant to do some things, and it's broken down into basically two parts that we're going to do. One, we're calling it the discrete, art projects, and we're trying to locate those in particular places. We're trying to find artists that can actually, bring the history up in significant locations. These are just examples of a couple of locations that I'm, kind of interested in. The obvious one is the highway that kind of chops the neighborhood off. But then there's interesting places where there are houses that, the steps remain. I think that's very interesting, and it's kind of poetic in itself. But then the other, what I'm really interested in these kind of spaces, though, where there's the ball field, which is, thousands of people from around the city go to that place, and they have no idea that they're on what is really sacred ground. In fact, there's possibilities that there's, remains buried under some of these, these places. So it's really, so I think that's a very interesting location. And so working with these, the management of places like this, trying to figure out how we can integrate, things into that. Now, when I talk about Project Row Houses, I'm creating a narrative, and I try to talk about how these things all fit together, right? So I come from, the shotgun house, and then seeing this idea of John Baker's symbolic things, tie that in to inspire people to collectively come together to reclaim a neighborhood, right? That's kind of the way the process worked for me. So in Tulsa, this is not necessarily what's going to happen, but I'm just giving you an insight on how I think about things and how things move. But one thing that happened was I was meeting with this young artist, this guy here, Alexander Walter. And we were talking, and he was talking about how he was doing the restoration on this beautiful old Art Deco building. And, and it was amazing. His story is amazing. I mean, he didn't have any experience in sculpture or anything like that, but that kind of, he's a very entrepreneurial kind of spirit. He was like, I can figure that out, and I can do it. He actually got that contract based on his own, will to figure things out and to put himself forward. So I met him, and then the next thing was I met this woman, Suzanne Wallace, whose husband is Michael Wallace, who wrote the book Route 66. And I was at dinner with her, and she was telling me about this book she had written about Art Deco in Tulsa. That was interesting. Then I went to a meeting of a group of an architecture firm that was looking at doing the expansion of the Greenwood Cultural Center, is here. And it's, notice how it's set off the street. I mean, so it doesn't create any kind of dynamic with the street. And when I looked at their plans, because I can't show them because they're still they're working through them, but I'll just kind of tell you about it. When I saw it, they had there was expansion over here, and it kind of went around like this kind of stuff. And I'm looking at it and just thinking, I didn't know how, I didn't know how to get it out, but so I just blurted it out. I said, look, I'm sorry, guys, but this is what are you doing? You're doing a shopping mall? Because, the entrance is here, and they had everything where you just stay inside once you get in. And I'm like, if Greenwood's going to, be significant in the future, you've got to do something with the street. There has to be something to the street. And so, fortunately, they were very open. And we sat there and we did this little charrette thing, and we ended up, so now it looks like there are going to be some things along the street here, which is interesting. And then after that, someone shot me this image and said, hey, if they're going to do something on the street, maybe we can do something that would harken to this particular thing, which apparently the person who rebuilt this in the 1920s, this building here, they took charred brick from the fire and they inserted it into the facade of that. And we were saying, maybe we could make some bricks or something. So, as I said, we're doing the discrete art projects, but another part for me is the social sculptural stuff. How do we create something that's collaborative, that builds something that's sustained and go on for the future? And so I started thinking, well, maybe we could make the bricks. I mean, I met a guy who's interested, who makes terracotta, he's doing that kind of stuff. And then I thought, we met with somebody who talks about the Tulsa and the Art Deco stuff. Maybe we can bring them together. And maybe we can start thinking about creating a studio, an enterprise that actually, that introduces a kind of Art Deco movement of the 21st century that is based on telling the story of the 1921 massacre. And so we started this conversation. We don't know where it's going to go, but my hope, though, is that, particularly this little entrepreneur enterprising thing, that if we can set up a design studio of people kind of looking at and exploring, what Art Deco means and some of its origins in Africa, that kind of stuff, and pulling that stuff into the language of articulating a new kind of Art Deco that could tell the story on the various buildings throughout, new buildings that come up, but also existing buildings could be a part of that. So just thinking about, how do you merge these things together? These kind of different walks of life. And with that, I'm going to stop here, though, because I know I'm way over time. Thank you very much. I will say that ultimately, though, to me, that's the image that, I'm really pushing people to kind of have that image in their head a lot more about what happened in the 1920s, and also, though, to use that image to speak to the fact that we should be ashamed of ourselves that if people in the 1920s who were denied so many opportunities to rebuild were able to do it, and here we are without those obstacles, and we're still not doing it. So
we understand if anyone needs to leave, thank you so much for joining us. We do want to acknowledge your time. However, we are going to continue the conversation, invite Hans up to the stage, and do a little Q&A. We would love for you guys to have the opportunity to interact with and ask questions of our speakers today. So I'll open us up with just a couple of questions based on time, and then we will open it up for Q&A with the audience. 25 minutes. Okay.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah, just reinforce your own. Yeah.
I'm over here. What I hear you saying in some regard, Rick, is it makes me think about the quote, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I have two questions. One, what was the aha moment for you prior to developing Project Row House? I mean, I think about my own life and how my career has developed, and then all of a sudden, something happens, and I call it, God touches me on my shoulder and says it's all on the inside, and an idea comes to mind, and then all the resources which you speak of very eloquently start to present themselves in the most perfect way. So what was it that you said you grew up in rural Alabama or in the South? What was the aha moment that took you down the direction of looking at those houses in a way that had not been viewed, considered, even had been a thought for anyone in Houston? Of course, needless to say, that took you to the next project and the next project and the next project. But it was something that got your attention, and you had been an artist for so many years doing other things that I'm sure that were brilliant. But what was it that took you down that particular path?
Okay, that's a good question. And partly, I want to just take part and really give it to the young woman in the front there too. But I think that's brilliant. You know, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That's something I think that, you know, if you're ready, to engage, if you're really ready to engage, the opportunities will appear, and you just have to kind of look for them if you're ready. And I think for me, from doing, there were a couple of key moments for me. One was, I've been doing these paintings that dealt with political and social issues and stuff like that, and I had done a piece that was addressing police brutality, and it was a very successful piece in my mind. It was successful enough that the activist community wanted to host a press conference and all the media and everything, and it was like Best Buy any count, right? But then I had a group of students, a friend of mine who taught high school brought their students by, and one student in particular that was looking at the work that I had all crammed in my studio, and he said, while it was interesting, it wasn't what the community needed. And I remember this so clearly. He said, if you're an artist and you're creative, why can't you create a solution? And that was like the moment in time in which I kind of had to rethink myself, think of myself as an artist and what I produce. I mean, was it meaningful and valuable for me to continue to produce work that was purely symbolic and reflective? Or was there an opportunity for me to create something that was, symbolic and reflective, but also had a practical application, to it? And that was that moment that I started to look for something else. And that's when I found the Joseph Beuys terminology of social sculpture, and I decided to try to figure that out within that framework.
So in some regard, did that change your, what someone would consider your core values and how you see the world, in terms of you writing or rewriting your own mission statement about who you are as a person that only manifests itself in the most perfect way as you as an artist?
It didn't shift my core values. It just gave me different tools. It's really interesting. I say this to my students who are interested in doing, social and community engaged work, and I always tell them to try to find their core value of who they are, because different people have different things, And I just think from myself, from a very early age, I've always been interested in, what's right and what's wrong, and who's getting wrong, and how do you address that. And I mean, I've come from a big family, 12 siblings, so I used to be in the middle all the time, trying to negotiate and trying to figure out, why this person's getting that and this one over here not getting, you know, I always do that. It was just part of me. So that remains, but there's just different tools to get to, you know. Yeah.
I have one last question for both of you. BlackSpace has done a phenomenal job in unveiling something that's always been here in the minds of Oklahomans. I grew up in Carverdale, lived on the East Coast for over 40 years. But at the end of the day, as we close out this amazing lecture series, and I've got my sister friend here sitting, I'm so proud of the work that the whole team has been doing. But when people leave here today, what is it you want them to take with them that they can do to make their own communities better, whether it's the northeast side of Oklahoma City or whether it's the most general comprehensive look of Oklahoma in general? What do you want them to take away from them in terms of them saying, I can do something, or unveiling something in their own mindset that allows them to be proactive? I have a belief that when people have knowledge, people can take action. So, can you share that with us?
I would like to think we're just getting started. I think that's so important. Right? We're just getting started. There are so many organizations out there already that we can plug into. We don't have to start something fresh. And I think that's what's so exciting about what's happening here is so much easier to build momentum when we build resources we do have, right? Going back to resources, because they're so finite. Leverage what's there already, and by golly, let's make sure your voices are heard. Don't let the usual processes continue to play out. We are in an amazing time in history where more than ever, and with the ubiquity of information and awareness, transparency, we have so much power as individuals to make a difference, but we have to speak up. Leverage those forums, speak up.
Yeah, you know, your question reminds me of something that I said this once before at a conference, and it was interesting because I'm a big basketball fan. I used to play and stuff, and I watch often. And this is when this guy Doc Rivers was coaching the Boston Celtics, and somebody, and one of the players quoted said that one of the things that he told them in practice all the time was so impactful for him. He said that, you know, if you want to go quickly, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with a group. You know, and I said that, and I attributed that to Doc Rivers, the basketball thing, whatever. And afterwards, someone, an African person came to me and says, you know, that's an ancient African proverb. But I'll throw that out to say that I think that's that sticks with me though about the idea that, you know, oftentimes we get caught up in our own selves and what we can do, and you know, and we have ambition that we want to do things in. You know, I think we can kind of shape and defer our ambition to how we can help other people identify this. If we already have our ambition and our drive, then we don't have to worry about that. What we have to worry about is the opportunity for ambition and drive in others, and trying to, you know, figure that out. To me, is the thing I would like for people to leave here with, an understanding that as someone sitting in this room, you're ahead of the game, you're already engaged or whatever. How can you get someone else engaged?
We're going to take 2 more questions, and then that's going to be it, okay? Hi, Rick. My question is to you. Being a resident of Tulsa, I'm excited to see your project for the Centennial, and also being a resident of Tulsa and living in the Greenwood District. And you're talking about, you touched on it a little bit, about gentrification. And looking at the 3rd Ward and having been down there, do you have any thoughts, and what are your thoughts about gentrification as far as property values from those homeowners not being able to sustain in that area that you're trying to keep their story alive? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you know, I learned this the hard way, you know, that, you know, I talk about scale, you know, and I'm very comfortable with, you know, the small scale thing. You do something small here, and connect to something small there. And then you can have, you know, a large scale by combining a lot of small things. And that's fine, but I also have realized over time, though, that you can act small, but you gotta really kind of think larger. And the challenge with the third war is that, I mean, we were very fortunate. It was almost forced upon us. It wasn't through any kind of wisdom that we acquired a lot of land. But, 20 plus years later, realizing we should have acquired a much, much greater amount of land, or at least tried to build some structure through which we could control land when it was, $1 to $5 per square foot, as opposed to now, it's almost, it's impossible without having, some kind of profitable engine behind, the land acquisition. And so what I have been trying to say to the folks in Tulsa, the Greenwood folks, is that, we're focusing on what most of people think of Lower Greenwood, the heart of where most people identify near the cultural center and where the rebuilt building still exists. That's what most people think of Greenwood. But the truth of the matter is Greenwood, much larger, but there's not a lot of focus on the northern part and even into North Tulsa. And my thing is they have to start thinking now about how to develop land strategies while nobody's, overtly thinking about it. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody thinking about it somewhere. But it's at this point that they really, really need to be aggressively in utilizing the centennial moment as a leverage point, to really get people motivated about, thinking about what Greenwood is going to be in, for the bicentennial. I mean, how do you, yeah.
Hi, I want to know this question is for each of you, what's your sort of big, scary, impossible, project or dream that you would like to see realized?
I guess I'm putting you up front all the time. I should just go. Okay. Okay. So for me, Du Bois talked about this, at the beginning of the 20th century, right? The challenge of the 20th century was color line. And that line moved all the way into 21st century. And one of the things, there's been a lot of battles fought around that, civil rights, through segregation, there's socially things are different. There's so many things that are different, right? But the economic battle has failed to be addressed, period. In fact, it's kind of gone backwards. Since I've been doing, research on this stuff, just kind of looking at the way that the economic conditions of African Americans have been dealt with, since emancipation, it's just amazing, how so many efforts have kind of kicked off and they railed. You talk about from, the Freedmen's Bureau, the failed Freedmen's Bureau Bank, and even, the New Deal and how, it was kind of centered around this urban thing, but so many resources went to suburban, support of it. African Americans just constantly, have lost, in that battle. And so to me, the big, scary dream is to take this centennial that symbolically represents a couple of things. It represents this lack of ability of white America to embrace an economically viable black presence in this country. One, and it represents also the capacity of Black people to really sustain. And I think this is the centennial, this 2021 centennial should be not something that we celebrate as a point in time that something happened. It should be the beginning of a renewed commitment. And I think it needs to be something that is that's not Tulsa-based. It needs to be something that is nationally based. And so generating in fact, part of my effort on this project is, I'm doing the project in Tulsa, but I'm also simultaneously working on a project in Chicago. There are all kinds of connections of the Tulsa riot to Chicago. I won't go into all that, but so in 2021 there will also be a Chicago presence that I'll be kind of producing. So an ideal thing though would be to be able to kind of leverage this into a national movement around a renewed awareness of the value that we get from society by promoting the economic well-being of African Americans. And I would just say, if you look at the history and and I've been reading a lot of this stuff, and it's amazing how there was lots of consciousness around this and lots of efforts made until the mid-1970s. After the mid-1970s, the focus of African Americans went from one that we had to figure out how to support and sustain, develop an economic sustainability around African American communities, to one of vilifying African Americans as being, drains on society, and then the prison complex, all that stuff. There's been no national effort from the federal government since the 1970s that have focused specifically on African Americans. Zero. And so to me, that would be the big, dangerous challenge.
I'll simply offer, the dream is that we have a situation where those who have the power, the resources, not feeling threatened about ensuring that everyone has the same access to the resources and power. And that's really what I'm looking forward to. Those who have shouldn't feel threatened, share, or empower or create a new system where everyone has the same access.
Thank you both. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great afternoon.
If I could say just very quickly for those community members, just to know that this project has actually spurred the potential of another project with the Metropolitan Library System, who may want to begin curating and preserving your stories. And hopefully we'll be able to continue to work with Dr. Floriani and Dr. Jackson in having some sort of ongoing oral history days. So we look forward to that possibility. Stay tuned, so we will tell you. Also, go look at the photo voice downstairs, please, the exhibit, before you go. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Maybe, but also balancing that with really collaborating and empowering community members to exercise their own agency and their own creativity. Like you said a little bit about trying to find the artist in everyone. So could you maybe speak a little bit to that balance?
Yeah. Okay, so the fortunate thing for me as being an artist, the fortunate thing about being an artist is that, the field is wide open, right? So, when, Duchamp went and, started putting, urinals on pedestals and that's art, whatever, all the kinds of things. So it becomes an issue of, contextualizing things, right? It's not so much about, it's not so much about the quality of the craft of things, it's about the context of meaning. And that's the thing that I'm really trying, and it's a difficult thing to do. How do you contextualize it? Because I'm trying hard to do this with the Tulsa Centennial Project, is that, for me, I want as many people as possible to be a part of telling that story, because I think the more voices in telling that story, the better. But how do you contextualize those voices that they actually have power? The kind of power that we expect from art. And so, to me, it's really just about contextualizing things.
Well, that is just so perfect, because my next question, really thinking about context and thinking about the duration of the project over the course of the last month, I would love to ask you both, how can stories really provide that context in ways that directly influence design? And more specifically, thinking kind of beyond some of our traditional methods like statues or plaques or even murals that have really literal imagery, what are some ways that stories can be interpreted and used in maybe more kind of abstract ways or more interpretive ways in terms of actually influencing design?
Well, it's a great question, especially when you're working the public realm, because we're, as Rick already mentioned, we have a certain training, right? And that training, in a way, is an effort to instill in us a belief that we have to be vigilant or true to our art. And anytime the public starts to interfere, it messes things up. The Oklahoma City National Memorial Competition was kind of a case in point, and the community really wanted the process to involve the public, right? And that they have a role in shaping the mission statement, that they have a role in deciding which design. And the architecture purists out there, some of those famous competition organizers, started to decry the process here in Oklahoma City and say, there's no way you can do anything good and lasting if you involve the public. And it was just incredible. So they threw the original competition organizer out because he refused to engage the public. And so they brought in another team, and it, I'd like to think that the project has been successful. But to Rick's point, the contextualization is so important because of our training, we may have a tendency to think, in terms of aesthetics and the kind of the purity of things, the clean stuff. And engaging the public, it balances it out. I mean, they are the key to the success of the work.
All right, well, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes. Do we have a mic runner at all?
This question is for Rick. Then they can.
This is about your work with the Tulsa Centennial coming up. You made a mention that, for all you know, there could be bodies still, well, we know that an area carries energy for a great many centuries it can carry. So how are you proposing to deal with that overall energy, that's all that people come up with when they hear Tulsa, Black Wall Street, massacre? What kind of challenges are you facing to try to bring something positive back into the very existence of Black Wall Street?
Well, I have to, I work based on the premise that the most powerful creative force is all around us, all the time, and all the people that are walking around. And the point is to really be able to identify the ones that are most appropriate in the right situation at the right time, and just encourage that, and to try to help facilitate that. And so it's not upon me to be able to pull that out. My role and my responsibility as a lead artist on this is really be able to kind of find those people, you know, whether they are, you know, traditional practicing artists or designers, or, I mean, I have this one person who comes to all of the artist meetings I've held so far, and I don't necessarily think that she's identified as an artist, but there's something about her that, I mean, I have a big, it's almost like the tablet from the 10 Commandments that she showed up last night with, and she left it with me. She says, you can have this for 1 week. And I'm looking, I have this thing, and I haven't looked at it to read all the stuff on it, but I'm like, there's something here, and so those are I start just kind of trying to, listen to those people and the things they have to say, and try to, figure out how to give them a platform to bring that up, that energy up.
Thanks so much for doing what you guys did today. One of the ingredients that you guys talked about was money to make this thing possible, right? So my question to you then is that, and money is becoming short in many facets, particularly in this country now. So my question then to you is, how do we create spaces without money? I know it's a very juvenile question, but one that is very important.
Or where do you get the money from?
Okay, so when you give money, I think things are I don't want to say contaminated, but are influenced by the givers, right? So there has to be a way. The reason I'm asking this question is, what are so many dreams that are not built because of the lack of money, right? And oftentimes, marginalized communities have this dramatic dreams that could transform the space that have been created within the context of Western ideologies. And that is where I'm coming from, right? These are not things that we could, like the shotgun homes in Houston, for example. So how can we use marginalized communities' resources minus money to create a space? So yeah.
My deep apologies for co-opting your question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We certainly, as architects, we're often viewed as dreamers, contractor. Any contractors in here? Contractors often view the architects as not knowing how to build anything, just draw up things without any reference point. And it's a tough position to be in because people look to us, among others, to help either generate or, more importantly, coalesce a vision for a place. And but the traditional training of the architect, it does not involve finance. And one of our big goals at the college now is to create a design entrepreneurship and real estate program where we teach our graduates the tools to be less beholden to those who are traditionally expected to bring money to the table. It behooves us to begin to understand better how the system works, whether we like it or not. Right? It's one of the reasons that Tori and I started to become developers because we were just tired of the developers saying, well, there's no money in it for that. Where does beauty, where does identity, where does the anchoring of a community fit in a pro forma state? It just doesn't. And that's very frustrating. And so it's so important that we take it upon ourselves to learn more, to educate ourselves more, right? And once we do that, maybe we do it ourselves. The other side to that, and I think Rick's work does a beautiful job demonstrating this, we're starting to see a world where maybe money isn't as important as just ingenuity and entrepreneurship and empowerment. It's offering the confidence in everyone to say, you know what, I can shape my own community. I don't need traditional architecture, you know, studs and concrete beams to create place and identity. And so in some ways, we're starting to see a trend where, you know, we don't need architects as much. We don't need developers as much. We just need empowered communities.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying there, too. And I think what you're alluding to in your last comments here is something that I'm often preoccupied with, is scale. You know, we live in a society now where, you know, we just always want to think big, bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know, the bigger it is, the more resources it's going to take. And I always, you know, and so, Yakin, my thing is, I always think of, like, I never try to think of things in terms of money. I try to think of things in terms of resources. I mean, what are the available resources to do something? And money is, of course, one of them. But there are many other resources, right? And how do you know, think about where those resources are and how you can leverage those resources. And one of the big challenges, though, of leveraging and accessing resources for doing things is scale becomes the block. You know, the thing that kind of, you know, knock people down. And people in here, do you guys know Theaster Gates? Do people know Theaster Gates? You know, when Theaster is an artist in Chicago who's, you know, very successful. When I first met Theaster some years ago, he came to me, he knew what I was doing in Houston. He's like, you know, how do you do that stuff? Yeah, I want to do this, and I want to do it. And he took me around and was showing me all these huge things that he wanted to do. And I'm like, dude, chill out. Do something small. And he did. He went back and he did this one small space, and then it opened up opportunities for other things. And now he has a whole, you know, whatever kind of thing. But it's, you know, it's about just kind of shifting the mindset and not thinking that, you know, in order to have impact, you have to have something that's giant and huge. You know, find the scale that fits the resources and allow that to open up possibilities.
I see a hand in the back. Oh.
While we're on the theme, you had a slide that had executive summary, and what caught my eye was wealth generation. You could tell me what that publication was, I'll make a note of it. But my question is, you have obviously found a way to leverage these projects into wealth generation for the community, whether it's giving artists a market, untapped assets which they have inherently but haven't been able to capitalize on. So can you provide additional insight into that as to how bringing one of these projects to community, what you need to do to leverage that to bring additional wealth generation to that community?
Well, you know, I mean, that's a part of those, like, those elements, principles of John Vigors that I talked about, you know, architecture, art and creativity, education, social safety net. Well, there's a fifth one I didn't talk about, was sustainability. And it's taken me a little while, you know, to get to that. And I think you have to live, for me, I had to live through a lot of things in order to see it. And you know, I have a great mentor that I've, you know, spent a lot of time playing dominoes with and kind of, you know, trying to figure out the world. And you know, I've been hanging out with this guy for nearly 30 years. And ever since I've known him, he's always said the same thing from an artist standpoint. It's like, we are producers. We produce things. And there are markets out there. We should, you know, and it just never hit me until, you know, just in the last, like, you know, 5-6 years, I was starting to understand this. That, you know, I mean, you know, it's interesting that I find myself at this point of looking at the value of entrepreneurship. But it's not from the standpoint of the traditional capitalist model of entrepreneurship that's about, you know, exploiting, but it's about sustaining. you know, in that a situation where, you know, if there are not employment opportunities for people, then they should at least give themselves a chance by creating something that they can, you know, provide for themselves. And so that, you know, and kind of I always think about that in the context of, you know, think about in New Orleans, the story was after, you know, Hurricane Katrina, so many people were waiting for the federal government to do something, you know, to save them. And I remember that one story of this 12, 13-year-old kid who went and took a school bus from the school. He knew what it was, and he drove that school bus to Houston, and people jumped on with him, you know. And because at some point you just have to figure out, you know the system should work, and you want the system to work, and you want to work towards the system working, but you have to figure out how to do something for you, you know, in the interim when it's not working. And so this notion of, you know, enterprising has become something that's, you know, really important to me, and that's why I'm really excited about this opportunity down in Tulsa to really dig into that, you know, and see what the possibilities are of creating something that's self-generating. I don't know if I really, you know, answered you.
Is the name of that publication? I'd like to look it up.
Oh, and that's not a publication. That's just a. Well, I mean, I can actually get it to you. A group of planners from MIT worked with us on developing a broader neighborhood plan for Project Row Houses. And that's just a page from the documentation of what our community came up with that were valuable elements to explore. I mean, I can
email you or
you can email me about it. I can send you that information. My email is
that's the guy with the harmony hat.
what?
Facebook hat that says harmony.
All right, good.
Right here. Yes. As an international student at OU studying interior design, I would like to ask if you have any ideas how a student can be involved in these kind of projects, and how students, especially students at OU, for example, studying interior design or architecture, how we can get knowledge related to these kind of projects and get involved and try to see how we can elevate the community here or even back home, for example, for me. And if there's anything you want to share for students and anything you want to teach us in specific.
I'll let you finish. I would offer, let's start with just graduating with confidence. It's less about the technical skills that you know, and it's more about who you are as a human being. That's where it all starts. You can either do it yourself and start it yourself, right? Because so many, you know, there's no template for so much of what's going on here. I mean, people just say, I believe in it, and I'm just going to figure it out. And I'm going to talk to as many people as I can and learn from them and see how many are going to join me, right? The best place to start, though, in physically is your own neighborhood. Like, where's my home? You know, we have resisted doing work in other communities because we feel like we're not qualified to do as much work in another community. And so we made Oklahoma City our home, and most all of our work, for the most part, is all here. Right? So where is home? Where can we profess some measure of understanding and kind of bring history and context for us, and then get everyone else on board. But, you know, start in your own neighborhoods.
I think that's it. I won't touch that. That's good advice.
Yes, this question is for Rick. We are currently experiencing a sort of a renaissance in the inner city of Northeast Oklahoma City. Lots of projects are happening, infrastructure being planned. You mentioned, and of course you know that attracts speculators, it attracts developers. You mentioned encouraging the respect of the architectural language in that community. I want you to, if it's possible, to expound a bit on how you encourage that respect for the current architectural designs without having overlays and guidelines for that.
I'm not sure. The question is, how do we get the community to
well, most often the community, they're not the ones with the dollars to build in those areas. So when you're talking about, you had in the project, the row house, you had the beautiful homes, and then you had the large scale
when you get that answer, I need to come and talk to you.
Right.
I mean, you know, it's, I mean, and, you know, being an architect, you know, like the majority of the buildings that are built nowadays, they're not really designed, you know, they're just, you know, people don't use architects to really think about design. They don't really, you know, the majority of buildings. I mean, so it's a rare moment that you find somebody who really care enough about the product that they're doing. They want to, you know, really be thoughtful about design. And that's certainly it's been my experience that, you know, for the most, and particularly in Houston, where I've done most of my work, you know, there's not a high bar for design, and if the bar is not high, then, you know, developers are going to go as low as possible, and it's a big challenge. It's a huge challenge. I mean, if you go into the neighborhood where we're working now, I mean, it's almost easy to recognize Project Row House's presence in the neighborhood, because it's, you know, the buildings that have some thoughtfulness around design are going to be kind of connected to Project Row Houses in some way or another. And because the market, the people that are supplying the market, almost impossible.